of the Omer. Okay. So thank you everyone for helping us make a minyan. Very happy to see so many friendly faces. I am now going to give the floor to Harriet. I'm going to unmute her. I'm going to keep everyone else muted. Please feel free to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question or speak. Harriet, are you willing to entertain questions in the midst of your talk, or do you want to say the whole thing and then take questions?
I'd like to say the whole thing and then take questions.
Okay, so feel free to raise your hand if you want, but I'm not going to call on you until Harriet is finished with her talk. If you don't know how to turn on your hand, you go to the bottom of your screen where it says participants, and you push that, and then you as participants will have a little button that says raise hand. If you are on the phone, then that will not work because you don't have a screen to push any kind of button. So if you're on the phone, you simply will push *9, and that will have the same effect. I will know that you've raised your hand, and I'll just ask you to be patient with me because I will be calling on people in some sort of random order to ask questions. I'll do my best to respond to people as they raise their hands, but you can't count on me. Okay, so Harriet, without any further ado, take it away. And Harriet, do you want me to show that?
Thank you.
Banner right now, or do you want me to wait until a certain time?
No, I'll tell you when, okay?
Tell me when. Okay, good.
Not yet.
Good, you'll tell me when and I'll be ready.
Yeah, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm happy to see all of you. I can't see all of you at once because you're not all on the screen, but I will see you eventually. I have to look at my script, but I'm so happy that you're here. Okay. Well, there's a verse near the beginning of this week's Torah portion, Leviticus chapter 25, verse. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Everyone can hear you, yeah.
Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10, which in its most well-known English translation says, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land and unto all the inhabitants thereof." That translation was inscribed back in 1751 on the big bell that came to be called the Liberty Bell. I didn't realize until I began working on this talk that this exhortation was inspiring to abolitionists in the decades before the Civil War. Indeed, they were the ones that started calling it the Liberty Bell. I'll be looking at that verse and the chapter where it occurs, chapter 25 of Vayikra, Leviticus. There, God, speaking through Moses, gives the Israelites complicated instructions for the time when they will be settled in the land he has promised them. He says they should plant and harvest for 6 years and then let the land rest on the seventh. The land will have a Shabbat, a Sabbath. No planting, no harvesting, no work by people, no work by animals. And God promises such an ample harvest in the 6th year that everyone will have enough to eat. And then, after 7 times 7 years, 49 years, the 50th year will be the Yovel, rendered in English as the Jubilee. Yovel and Jubilee, that's not a translation, it's the same word in a not unusual linguistic transformation. The Y in Yovel becomes a J, the V becomes a B, so Yovel becomes Jubilee. The people are instructed that in that 50th year of Jubilee, the 50th year of this agricultural cycle, on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, the shofar is to be blown all over the land. All the slaves are going to be freed, and all the plots of land that had been sold are going to revert to their original owners. Okay. So I've been thinking about how this text and language about proclaiming liberty and about the Jubilee has passed in various ways into our popular culture. The complex faith-based message in the Torah text changes in all kinds of ways in that process, sometimes broadening, sometimes losing most or all of what it meant in a Torah context. Let's start with the inscription on the Liberty Bell and the abolitionists as one example. Then I'm going to touch on some translation issues with that verse. Then I'll move on to the Jubilee in popular culture. And then I'm going to open things up for discussion. Okay. So now the original bell, there actually have been many of these bells, but that's another whole story about cracks and so forth. The original bell was first cast with that passage inscribed upon it, proclaim liberty and so forth, back in 1751, even before the revolution. It was cast for the 50th anniversary of William Penn's charter for the state of Pennsylvania, my home state. And it was considered the Jubilee of the charter. So we see already that the Torah Jubilee is transmuting into a 50th anniversary celebration. Then later in our country's history, as the citizens of the new United States looked back on their revolution with a little added invention, which I won't go into here, the bell came to stand for independence for the colonists from King George and England, that kind of liberty, liberty as independence. And then in the pre-Civil War decades, the 1830s, the 1840s, the 1850s, that's when the bell was embraced by abolitionists. According to what I found out, it was first called the Liberty Bell in 1835. A few years later came an anti-slavery journal called the Liberty Bell. And then came many images with the inscription, with the bell and with the sentence. So Rabbi Jim, could you put that up now, that image? This will just be up for a few moments. Okay, beautiful.
Harriet?
Harriet? Yes?
Since
Yes.
there's at least one person here who does not have a screen, would you be willing to describe?
Okay, I'll say what it is. Okay, it's a banner that has a bell on it. And in the background is the statement that's engraved on the bell: proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It's kind of a reddish brown banner. So this is one of many. This banner I found online. It's in the archives of the Massachusetts Historical Society here in Boston. The notes say it was made in 1843. It was taken by the noted abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison all around to anti-slavery fairs and festivals. And you'll notice that the all is bigger. Note that all is bigger. I think that was probably to remind viewers that the slaves were not yet free throughout all the land until all the inhabitants thereof. So that's just one of many examples of how this verse from the Torah in English translation got into the abolition movement. It was sort of all over the place. Okay, thank you, Rabbi Jim. That's it. So here we see this verse getting into popular use and being inspiring for people. Yet, keep in mind that in the Torah description, that whole 50-year plan leading to the Yovel, leading to the Jubilee, was not actually a plan for the permanent abolition of slavery. It was not that. I see it as a faith-based plan to mitigate the effects of wealth and power concentration within a small early agricultural society, and to prevent the formation of a permanent underclass of slaves and poor people. Every 7 years, the whole system goes on pause, giving everybody time to reflect. And every 50 years, it gets thoroughly shaken up. Those slaves are freed, debts are vanishing, and so forth. And then everybody sort of starts over. So I see it as a kind of mitigating device. And I think we could ask ourselves, have we in our society done any better in mitigating wealth and power concentration and preventing the formation of an underclass of very poor people? Is there something we can learn here? Think about it. But anyway, the abolitionists took it up, but it isn't really an abolitionist document as I understand it. It's not about permanent abolition. It seems to say that every 50 years we'll have to do it again. And of course, slavery is still happening in many parts of the world. So there's something to say for that. Okay, well, as I continued learning about that history and reviewing our text, I got interested in the word dror, Daled Resh Vav Resh, which just about everybody translates translates liberty in that verse. Now that was not the word I knew for liberty in modern Hebrew. So first I asked Ilana in our congregation, who's a native speaker of Hebrew, about that word. And she said, true, it's not used for liberty now, but like many words in the Torah, it still exists in ordinary speech, but with a different meaning. Dror today, she said, is a little bird. It's a sparrow. And it can also be used as a name. People can be named Dror, just like Robin in English. Robin is a bird, and a person can also be named Robin. So now we have the little Dror, the sparrow. So how were these translators so sure that Dror means liberty? So I looked at some translations and some notes, and I discovered that the literary scholar Robert Alter, who, as you know, has done a big modern translation of the Torah, has a big footnote on this passage. And he says, sorry, guys, Dror should not be translated liberty because scholars have determined that it has a cognate in ancient Akkadian, Anderuru, and it really means release. It means release from debt and indenture. He says Dror is economic release, not liberty in the broad sense that we understand it. And in his translation, he translates it release. So then I thought of the only person I knew who has studied ancient Akkadian, who was our in-house scholar of ancient languages, Paul Kosman. So I called up Paul Kosman and I asked him what he thought about Robert Alter's criticism, all right? And also I wanted to know where else in the Tanakh, where else in the Hebrew Bible that word appears. So, he pushed a little button and all the appearances popped up. And it actually is used by several of the prophets. Isaiah uses it in the phrase, likro lishvuim, dror, to announce release from captivity to the captives. So it was in use in that phrase. And Paul also told me something interesting, which is that the root of that word, daled resh resh, expresses flow and movement. So actually it makes sense that in the Torah, it means liberty, and today it could mean a bird, because don't we say free as a bird, right? That's an expression. So why not? So I would say that translating Dror as liberty is what I would call an expansive translation, which we also often find in English translations. It's sort of more expansive and resonant than the original text would seem to allow. And so suppose that whole passage, which is very terse, had been translated this way: announce release from debt and indenture to everyone living in the land. Now that clunky sentence is not going to be engraved on any bells and banners. It's just not too inspiring. If we say ba'aretz, that's in the land, but that's not as dramatic as throughout all the land. So where are we with this verse? Well, my own view is that proclaim liberty throughout the land is to all the inhabitants thereof is appropriate, even though the Hebrew is very terse because of the grandeur of the vision that's being described, people going over the land, blowing the shofar, slaves being released, even though the actual text is very terse. It sort of adds an imaginative dimension to the text. And before I would go on, I want to make a general point that because of the centrality of the Bible to so many people in the world, the words chosen by the translator can affect whole social movements, which is what we see with the abolitionists who took up this slogan, that it does really make a difference whether you translate expansively or sort of in a minimalist way. And I hope we can talk some more about that. And also in the two very interesting talks that Abby Gilman gave us in the last 2 weeks, she showed us that the works chosen by German Jewish translators for the name of God have important implications for theology and belief in that population in the German Jewish community. So translation matters. And when it passes into popular culture, of course, that's in translation. So now, moving on, how has the term Jubilee passed into popular culture? I'll give one example, and hopefully you'll share some others during the comments. You might have heard of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Yes, Fisk Jubilee Singers, that's a choral group associated with Fisk University, a historically African-American university in Nashville. They've been around a long time, and they were the subject of a PBS documentary, which some of you may have seen years ago, and which I sort of floated back into my mind when I was planning this talk. So I wondered how they got named Fisk Jubilee Singers. And I looked around and I found out that that group was organized long ago, back in 1871, right after the Civil War, as a little tiny group of 8 singers and a pianist. They were traveling from Fisk University to several cities in the North to sing and raise money for the already almost bankrupt New College, which had been founded by white missionaries to educate newly freed slaves. This is just a few years after the end of the war. And along with the 9 singers went the music director of the school, who was the treasurer, George L. White, one of those extraordinary individuals that we haven't heard of, and I certainly had not heard of him. So here are these 9 African-American young people on tour in Cleveland and Columbus and other northern cities, and they were impoverished and ill-treated by a lot of the Northerners. They were depressed, they were discouraged, and almost gave up. And George White, who thought they needed a new name to capture audience attention, went off to pray. And according to the account I read, he came back and met with the singers and said, quote, "Children, it shall be Jubilee Singers in memory of the Jewish year of Jubilee." This was a reference to Jubilee described in the book of Leviticus in the Bible. And since most of the students at Fisk University and their families were indeed newly freed slaves, the name Jubilee Singers seemed fitting. And of course, that's from a history of the group. So George White knew his Leviticus. He knew the reference, he understood it. But now it's 150 years later, that group has been around, it's made a lot of CDs, a lot of recordings. How many listeners do you think are aware of the biblical connection and what it really means of the Yovel? Probably, I would imagine, very few. So here we see a sort of diffusion. It's like dropping something in a glass of water and it sort of dissolves. We see the term Jubilee sort of diffusing into the popular culture, becoming the name of a group, becoming something which they sell CDs. And there's still a connection with the original biblical source, but it's kind of tenuous. So before I conclude, I want to mention that within Jewish learning, there's a huge amount of scholarship that I haven't touched on concerning this whole 50-year Jubilee cycle. Just a huge area. I've only devoted myself to this popular culture thing. There's the unsettled question, for example, of whether the ancient Israelites ever actually observed the Shemitah, the 7 years when they were in the land. There's controversy about that. There's a tractate of the Talmud about the Shemitah. I think, what is this called? Shviti. And there's a controversy even today in Israel among observant Jews about whether it's commanded today to observe that 7th year by those who farm the land. And if it is commanded, how can they possibly do it? So if you're interested in that aspect, there's really an ocean of material out there, which I am not competent to talk about, but I just wanted to sort of indicate that it's out there. So now I'm going to conclude in a slightly different way before we have questions. As I was starting to think about this talk, the refrain of a song popped into my mind. Swing and turn, Jubilee, swing and turn, Jubilee. Where did that come from? Swing and turn, Jubilee. I hadn't thought of this song in about 50 or 60 years, but it kept running through my mind. What was it? So after a phone chat with a friend, I realized it was an old folk song that was popular in the 60s that Jean Ritchie, a wonderful folk singer of that era, used to sing. And I actually found it on YouTube with Jean Ritchie singing and Doc Carter playing along with her. And I'm going to sort of sing a little bit of it. The song is great, but what I want you to notice is that the term Jubilee has completely, and she's wonderful, the term Jubilee has completely lost its biblical meaning. If it means anything, it means have fun. It's tacked on at the end of the verse. So this is an example of how the whole immense biblical vision has become the tagline of a folk song, but it's a wonderful song. So all out on the old railroad, all right on the sea, all out on the old railroad, far as I can see, swing and turn, Jubilee, live and learn, Jubilee. Swing and turn, Jubilee, live and learn, Jubilee. Hardest work I ever done, working on a farm. Easiest work I ever done, swinging my Lou Love's arm. Swing and turn, Jubilee, live and learn, Jubilee. Swing and turn, Jubilee, live and learn, Jubilee. Well, thank you for listening. And now I'm hoping we can open things up and have a conversation about some of these matters. And Jim, you can figure out how to unmute people and give them a chance to say whatever they want to say.
Great. Thank you, Harriet. That was wonderful. I really, really enjoyed your talk. And so I already have one hand up, and please, it would be really great if you could raise your hand electronically. I'm going to repeat the instructions in case you weren't on when I said them before. Towards the bottom of your screen, you should have a thing that says participants. Please go to that. Excuse me one second. My son was supposed to cook pizza, and that he's taking a nap. So I'm cooking pizza and moderating at the same time. So I apologize. So I see, right. So good. Where it says participants, you can go there and raise your hand. If you are on the phone, please feel free to raise your hand by pushing *9, and that will do the job. All right, Maury, you're up.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great talk. I think you undersell your literal translation of a year of release. Even in the American context, if in 1868 people really thought about this is forgiving debts and a year of release, 40 acres and a mule would have been would have had some much more force behind it, rather than an abstract concept of liberty.
Thank you.
All right, Norman, hold on one second, Norman. I have to unmute you.
Okay,
Norman.
here I am. Hi, Harriet. Terrific. Thank you. Following up on Maury about the underselling, it should be noted, it doesn't really change the idea of release, but it's not just land that is released, but also people. And not just debts, it's also people, because later on in the chapter,
Norman, for some reason you froze. So would you please go back and start again?
okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, you're good. So on the question of, following what Maury was saying, the release, don't undersell it too much. It does relate, although not exactly, to the slavery situation, because it's not just land or monetary debts that will be released, but also people who have come into your service because they were impoverished. It only applies to your fellow Israelite, so it's not as broad as it's not all the inhabitants of land. So I just wanted to say that to expand the shot, the actual original text. But also I want to say, I think some of that folk song that you sang a little bit of, and the general use of the word Jubilee, I think has been affected or infected or mixed with a different word, which is jubilant, which comes not from Hebrew, but from Latin. Jubilare is to make a loud noise with a horn, I think. But now there may be, in some misty way that's in the mists for me, there might be a connection, because the root of Yovel is a ram's horn, sort of like a shofar that is used for proclaiming. So, and whether that's, I don't see how it could have a connection with this jubilare, but I think that the two words have both come into English, the jubilee and the jubilant and the jubilation, so it's an interesting thing. Since you seem to be, obviously interested in the origin of these words, so I'm just adding that to what you said. Okay.
Okay. The
Thank
next
you.
person is Sherry. Wait, what happened to Sherry?
Sherry's here.
There we
You're
are.
muted.
Yeah, you can hear me now, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was just a wonderful Torah, Harriet. Thank you. It was just really fascinating. But I wonder whether, although the original meaning is lost, but if the original sentiment is still there in each of those concepts, and whether the original Jubilee was moving in a direction of release from oppression and equality and all the notions that go with proclaim liberty throughout the land and Jubilee. All those, even though the root is lost, I think the feeling was, the original feeling carried through into those ideas.
Lovely.
I see Norman shaking his head, so somebody agrees with me.
I think that's great, Sherry. Thank you. All right. The next person is
Who else? Who else?
The next person is Marty. Marty, I'm trying to unmute you, but I can't, which means you need to unmute your own self. Thank you.
How's this? Can you hear me now?
Good. All good.
Okay. I wanted to make a small point. I think it's similar to the point that Maury made, but in his usual modesty, I wanted to make it stronger in my usual immodesty. I think that Harriet seemed to imply that this didn't go far enough in giving freedom because it only freed the indebted. But my understanding has always been, ever since I started coming to Hillel, that those were the only slaves in the Torah. And they didn't have complete slavery. They didn't have slavery by type of person. They didn't have it for life. It was always ended. So I think there's that. And then the second thing I would say, and I'd like your response to the first for a minute, Jim. The second thing is, this is in many, many ways, connections between Jewish thought, not only in 1850, but in 1950, Jewish thought and African-American interests, in that they're very parallel. And I know African-Americans who in their church congregations say that Moses is a leader almost at the same height as Jesus, or he's in that same pantheon. But if you could respond to that, to the first point, that it really doesn't need to go that far.
Yeah, I mean, I would not want to speak for Black churches, obviously, but in terms of slavery in the biblical context, it is not chattel slavery like we had in our country, where people owned other people. It was usually a matter of being indebted and buying, and that was among the reasons for the idea that people could be released from it.
Yeah, that was the word I meant to use, chattel. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome. All right, I see here.
I just want to say, oh,
Go ahead, Harriet, go ahead.
I just want to say, I want to encourage my friends and cousins who are here to have something to say. If you want to say something, please.
Well, Richard Kramer
right
wanted
ahead.
to say something, so here he is.
Oh, that's my cousin. Okay, good.
Richard, I'm going to unmute you.
Great.
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
I have a couple questions or points. They've been made before, I think, but in the Torah, the only Hebrew slaves, and if the slave chose not to be released and they stuck a pin in his ear or whatever, he could stay forever. That seems a rather limited kind of release, and I'm wondering, whether that is ever discussed or is sort of ignored because it really doesn't get us very far as abolition of all slavery. That's my question.
I don't know the answer. My
Norman
knowledge
appears to
doesn't
have
go
the
to that point.
Norman is going to tell us.
Maybe somebody.
Well, I'm not going to give a complete answer, but first of all, it's not answering Marty before. There definitely were slaves. They just weren't Israelite slaves. There were people captured in war, men and women, and those could be slaves. So I don't think that's the. It's too bad that we would like our Torah to say everybody should be released, but I don't think that's the case. I think there were people who were owned basically, and even what was just said about the person who wants to remain a slave. I don't even think that's the Hebrew slave either. I have to check that, but I think that's the real captive. Miriam, is that wrong? You seem to be objecting. Yeah. Anyway, so I just wanted to add that because I think it's not. We shouldn't have the. It would be nice to think that there weren't any real slaves in the Bible, but there were. There's a lot of laws about. There's a lot of laws about treating them humanely, but there are slaves.
Well, I just want to say one thing, which is in the lead up to the Civil War, ministers on both sides used the Bible. People in slave states, those ministers said, well, they're slaves in the Bible. And the abolitionists did what I've been talking about, which is they took the line, proclaim liberty throughout the land. So it went both ways. Anyway, I'm sure we have some more comments. Anybody?
Jim Leffert would like to say something.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes.
It's my understanding that the slave who wanted to stay with his master and didn't want to be released, there was an issue of the Torah balancing property and liberty in a way, because this person may have married somebody else in the household who is a slave, who is a servant or a slave, and they don't want to leave their wife and children. And so they're electing to stay in the household of the person who they are enslaved to. So I wanted to bring that up. I think that has something to do with why somebody would be motivated to stay in a position of servitude.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Anybody else? Do we have another?
Yeah,
Oh,
Just
yeah, great. Thank you.
follow up on what Jim was saying, and it's in A. It's quite clear that this slave or servant, the word Eved doesn't exactly translate in English, who is undergoing this ritual of the ear being pierced and so on, is in fact a Hebrew person and he is probably for the reasons you mentioned, saying he wishes to stay. And that in spite of the fact that if he was released, he would get to take a certain amount of property. He doesn't go away empty-handed.
Jim?
And I see.
Hello?
Do you want to say something, Harriet?
Yeah, my friend Nancy has her hand up, but you can't see it very well.
I see.
So
T. Dublin has the hand up. Is that the same person?
Can you see it now?
no, but that's okay.
Oh, I can
Go
see
right
it.
ahead.
I don't see that. I can't see that hand, but good, Nancy, go ahead.
Okay,
And then
I'm Nancy Shepherd, and Harriet and I have been friends for many years. And one of the things we've always liked to do is talk about our faith, because I go to the Episcopal Church, and she goes to church or worships in this way, and we have always loved to talk about the different things. And so it's been a treat for me to be here at this service. And I have to tell you, when we have our service on Sunday, it's very much like this. It's virtual. Hardly anybody's in the church, and but we still, are keeping our faith. So it's wonderful to see that that's the way it is for you too. I have a question though about the taking the seventh day off, and maybe Harriet said something about it. One of my daughters, Ruth, is a sheep farmer, but she also raises hay, and I'm interested in asking her if they try to give when they're growing something, if they try to give a relief to the ground in which they're growing things. And I wondered also if that had anything to do with a custom in Judaism, whether the farmers help, I guess I'm saying, sort of relieve the ground by not making it work on the seventh year. Did you hear that one, Harriet?
Well,
Did you
yes,
hear it?
actually, it's something I didn't get to mention in my talk, is that this whole section has been taken up by Jewish environmentalists. There's a whole lot about that, who have been using this part of Torah to talk about care of the land, including giving the land a rest and letting it regenerate. So I think, and I found some interesting things on this subject on the internet. So it's another whole just to make a bad pun, it's an offshoot of this parasha, that in contemporary times we have young Jewish farmers looking at this parasha to find a ground, if another bad pun, for their work on the land. And I think it's great that it's becoming reinterpreted in that way.
Thank you.
So yes.
That's great. Thank you, Nancy. I really appreciate that. I'm going to unmute now the person who is labeled T. Dublin. Please go ahead.
Hi, Tom.
Hi there.
Thank you. I
Hi,
didn't.
Harriet. Hi, everybody. I'm
Hi.
Kitty Starr,
Hi.
and this is Tom Dublin, and we are historians who have worked with Harriet so happily for many years on many different projects. It's been a real blessing in our lives. And thank you so much, Harriet, for bringing us this topic today. It's so appropriate for historians of the United States to be thinking about this. And I just want to mention, because historians work collectively, it's sort of a herd mentality of historians, that they write what is relevant to today and to one another. And what is happening now in the treatment of slavery in American history is the movement of slaves. The escape of slaves is like a huge topic. And I just want to say what you probably all know, that the Pulitzer Prize that was announced yesterday is a book in this category with the title Sweet Liberty. And it's about, so it's an example of how historians are uncovering the stories of enslaved people becoming free. And we've seen it in the popular film of Harriet, which Tom and I recently saw, and it's pretty good to be sheltering as we are and be able to see these films, and that we really recommend. And it's not just because it's named for our dear friend Harriet, but it's of course
It's a different Harriet in the film.
So
Yeah.
it's of course Harriet Tubman, and so
Yeah.
whenever you have a chance to promote the idea of Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, do that. Because it might actually happen, and that we would have this story in our lives, in our daily commercial transactions. So thank you very much for inviting us to this wonderful event. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your comment. Tom, did you want
It's my pleasure, my pleasure.
No, I'm fine.
You're good. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm gonna unmute now David Rubin, who wants to speak.
Yes, hello, everyone. It's so good to see you. I'm living...
Wonderful to see you, David.
Thank you. Ellie and I are living down at Orchard Cove. And so we're in the midst of these lockdowns as well. But Harriet alerted me of this Bar Torah tonight, so I was very happy to join in. And I basically just want to add a historical footnote. It's the bar mitzvah portion of our oldest son, Ben, who was bar mitzvahed in 1977 when the worship and study minyan was at Phillips Brooks' house. And Norman was involved, I think, in helping Ben prepare for bar mitzvah, as was Jane blocking.
Myers.
Jane Myers, thank you. So that for really a wonderful memory that we hold dear. As far as the portion, it's one of the great ones to be sure. And I loved Harriet's approach, really close reading and really studying that essential, a couple of those essential terms. and how they've changed. I actually gave a Dvar Torah on this same portion so many years ago, I can barely remember it. But one thing I do recall is this whole idea of the land belonging to no one, the idea of stewardship, that the land is, we are caretakers, not just of land literally, but of all property. And I had referred to the grapes of wrath, where basically the same point is being made at a certain point in the text, where there really is a prophetic kind of denunciation of what had happened in terms of land ownership as the Depression went on, and the uprooting of people. And so I think that's an important aspect, how in the world that we live in, pandemic aside for a moment, but barely for a moment, the way in which inequalities have proliferated, and in a sense what the pandemic has revealed about the inequalities within which we live. I think this passage bears a lot of meaning, I hope, and I just thank you all for attending to it.
Thank you, David. It's great to see you.
And likewise.
David, I'm just going to interrupt the proceedings for 1 second to make sure that you still receive our minion bulletins. Do you?
Yes, I do.
Good, good. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Norman, I'm going to call on you.
I just want to say
Norman,
to
wait.
David and Ellie, if she's
Norman, wait 1 second. Norman, just wait 1 second. I'm going to say one thing, because you are going to be the, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and say that you get the last word and before Harriet. Okay, so please go ahead.
okay. My word is just welcoming David and Ellie if she's there. Also, we haven't seen them in a long while. They are longtime members of Worship and Study. And I want to say in this particular context, David, for a number of years, was in charge of arranging Divrei Torah, and he gave many of them himself. And one more thing, that's one of my favorite lines that David is referring to, which is Ki li haaretz. This is God talking. God is the landlord, and God says, the land is mine. You're just tenants. So just to elaborate on what David said. That's all. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Norman. And Harriet, so you get the official last word because you're our darshan, or darshanit tonight. So please take the floor and say whatever you'd like.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming, both my minion members who I see on these little screens a lot lately, and my friends and cousins who have arrived from everywhere, California, Florida, North Carolina, Philadelphia, etc. And it's just very exciting to have everyone here, and I'm very happy about it. So I want to wish you all that you'll be safe and well, and that it won't be too long before we'll be able to see one another, not on a screen, but face to face. That's it. And thank you, Rabbi Jim, for moderating.
Thank you for a wonderful.
So what I'm going to do is I have to run, but I'm going to leave. I will leave the meeting open, and people can continue to schmooze with one another if you want to catch up. There's a lot of people, so it might not be so easy, but feel free to schmooze and to enjoy each other's virtual company, and hopefully we'll be able to be in each other's physical presence sooner than later. So good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Jim.
Harriet.
Good night, Jim.
Good night.
Thank you so much, Harriet.
So you can all depart as you wish, and if anyone has anything else to say, you can.
I want to say one other
minutes.
word
You
of
can tell
welcome,
me.
because I haven't seen Maury in all this time, and it's very nice to see you at these. I know you've been at other events like this, but I haven't seen you because for good reason you're not with us on Shabbos morning. So that's all.
Well, it's a pleasure. to
Hi,
see you
David.
as well.
Harriet, It's Frida. I
Yes.
thought you did a great job. Thank you very much.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
it
you
was
so
wonderful.
much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
It's
Harriet,
really wonderful.
Harriet, your cousin's from North Carolina. Loved what you had to say. It
Oh,
was very
hi. Great. That's my cousin Richard Kramer in North Carolina who recently, what? He recently
Harriet.
had
This
a
is
big
Richard.
number birthday, which I was virtually. Yeah. Oh, great. Hi.
Bye.
Harriet, Nancy, talk to you soon.
Goodbye.
Okay.
Thank you, Harriet.
Thanks, Harriet.
Thank you. Thank you.
Definitely.
Great
Thank
talk.
you, Judy. Thanks for coming. Good night,
And
everybody.
the singing was great too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
boy.
I want to say
Go
hi
and
to
listen
Jonathan
to it
Wilson.
on YouTube. Go and listen to it on YouTube.
Right.
About the marching through Georgia.
Oh.
I don't think he can come.
Just if you Google Gene Ritchie,
Sure.
Gene Ritchie, swing and turn Jubilee, it'll come right up
Yep.
and you'll really enjoy it.
Harriet? Harriet?
Okay. Yes.
Go ahead, speak.
Oh,